Hi, I'm going to talk you through how I do a measured drawing. Now, today we're going to be drawing this chrysanthemum. We're going to be doing it head on and it's going to be measured. So that means basically it's not just going to be a simple flower drawing, it's going to be an accurate flower drawing. So hopefully what we have here should resemble our drawing. A few of the things I will use specifically today are a see-through ruler. I'll be using probably 2 erasers, so I'll be using this plastic eraser and I'll also be using my Tombow eraser so that we can get into the little gaps. Definitely be using a knife because for scientific illustration we need our pencils at the sharpest point that we can get all the time. I'm going to be using the Faber-Castell 9000 graphite pencils. I usually use a 6H and a 4H for the initial drawing, and then probably I'll use like maybe an HB or a 2B, maybe a 4B as well to finish it off. We're not doing the shading today, we're just doing the line work to keep it nice and simple. And then what we will want to do is we want to write down our measurements, and I will show you some of the information that we write down that goes along with the scientific illustration, because it's all about note taking and making. At this point I thought I was talking way too much, so I pulled out my 6H pencil, sharpened it and just got on with it. Sharpening with a knife over a pencil sharpener helps us to get a finer point without wasting so much lead. I start with taking a few height measurements. We want to take the highest point, and I basically drew a little box. You'll notice when I'm taking measurements that I move the ruler sort of across ways or up and down. That's so that I can identify where the widest points are. It's not always in the center. Sometimes the petals at the bottom might be stretched out wider than the others. So you want to make sure that you get the widest and the highest points. Mark them down, draw yourself a little box, and this will act as a guide so you can keep your drawing within this box. The 6H pencil allows this to remain really light so that it's not too obvious in your drawing. I'm going to go ahead and use a pen to permanently write in the measurements. This way I don't forget them, and you'll see me marking on little lines. This is so that we can demonstrate point to point where these measurements are. Now I'm not drawing these lines over the pencil lines, they are just on the edges and outside of them. Making these guidelines and taking all these measurements is the part of drawing that takes the longest, and you might find it a bit tedious, but I assure you that it is so worth it at the end, because you'll get a much more accurate flower representation. So now I'm looking where I need to measure. I want to draw the center. In order to do that, I'm going to measure, rather than the center itself, the distance from the bottom and tops of the petals to the start of the circle in the middle. So I'm going to mark on some lines. This is the height of the first petal. The idea is to create a little box. So now I'm doing the top, making sure that I write down those measurements so that I don't forget them. Then we'll do the width. Rather than draw a line all the way down here, I'm just going to draw a line into that middle square section. And I'm just rubbing out all the lines around the outside. So I have an outer square and then I have a kind of central square. Now, due to the petals being some being folded over and bent, you may get a odd shape in the center. It might not be purely square, but this is why we're then going to go over and we're going to measure the square at the circle itself, as well as that space where the petals were. So I find the center of the square. It's looking more of a rectangle at this point, and I want to make it circular, so I have already measured the width and the height for the circle at this point, and I am putting lots of lines through the central point. These help me to draw the circle. So the more little lines that you have, the easier it is to join them up and to make your circle look more accurate. So all I did really was find the center point and do a cross and then do lots of lines through that cross. Now I'm looking at the inside of the circle and I'm noticing that there are different circles of colour. There's a central circle of green, and then there is a layer of yellow, and then there seems to be another circle of green as well. So what I'm doing right now is taking the measurements of those, and I'm going to draw myself a little circle in the middle and then another circle to represent that circle of green. And I'm taking the measurements between those different colours, which will help me to draw those circles. And again, these are still guidelines, so we're still using our very light 6H pencil. But once we've done that, we're going to erase between those lines as well, so that we're just left with 3 circles and the outside square. Now the guidelines are drawn, I want to start doing the details. So I switch my pencil up to a 2H. I usually draw on pencils in HB, but I don't quite want it that dark just yet. So in this section, I'm going to use the 2H pencil to start drawing my flower. It's really good to spend some time really observing the details. Here I will take it off screen because I will be using a magnifying glass to really look at those. There are so many tiny parts to this flower, but I'm going to go for the accuracy of shapes rather than the quantity of parts. So I noticed that all those tiny little bits in the middle look like individual flower shapes, so that's what we're going to start drawing. And I'm going to try and get the size of those accurate. I estimated that there's about 20 of those in the centre, and I'm going to try and fit as many of them in as I can, using that very tiny little central circle that I drew as a guide. You'll notice that the actual drawing the flower is a lot quicker of a process than drawing all these guidelines that we did earlier. Something to note is that the shape of the parts in the centre aren't exactly circular. We're just using the circle as a loose guide, and that's why we do it so lightly. Guide should be about very loose shapes. And it's when we draw the details that we define those shapes. I noticed that the yellow parts around the green centre are exactly the same, they're just a different colour. I'm going to draw them the same, but I'm going to define them differently later on with a different grade of pencil. For now I keep drawing with the 2H pencil, noticing that the green circle seems to be the same shape, but they seem to be a lot larger. So I draw those little tiny flower shapes, I just draw them a bit larger. I try to draw the shapes I see and get them as accurate as I can. As I come to the edge of the circle, I notice there is a completely different shape. and I have to incorporate that shape into my drawing. I try to guesstimate how many of these shapes there are and try and fit a similar number in. Although it's not always possible, the more accurate that you can be, the better your drawing will be. Hopefully here you'll be able to see some of those shapes on the left and see how the effort put into these tiny details really reflects the realism of nature. Now we're going to start working on the petals. To do this, we want to make guidelines, so I go back to using the 6H pencil. This is where it gets really complicated. What we want to do is a line, a straight line for every petal. Now we notice that the petals are split into 3 layers, so we start with the petals that are on the top layer. Now all the petals are going to be a different length and on different angles. Now the angle is the thing that's really difficult. So what we need to do is imagine that the flower is split up into 4 right angles, so into quarters, and then find the center of the flower, which is in the middle of the circle, and measure how far away the base of the petal is from that center. We can do a height and a width measurement from the base of that petal within the square, and then mark a point, and then we take a measurement from the outside edge of the flower tip. So we want to then measure the height and the width that the tip of the petal is from the outside square rather than from the center. So you go along the bottom line of the square, and then you go up for the height of the side of the square. That's where you mark on your other point. So then you have 2 points, and then you figure out the length of that petal, and that's how long between the points that you draw the line from the center. It's a little bit complicated, but hopefully you can see from what I'm doing in the picture. You can pause this, rewind it, and rewatch it to get a better idea. Then I start drawing the petals. Now I do this by measuring the width of each petal. Once you mark on roughly where the width is, then you can draw the tip of the petal, and in this case the tips tend to be quite pointed. Some of them are flatter where the petals are curled over. Draw what you can see, but putting that width measurement on first, a couple of lines to show you how wide the petal is really, really useful at drawing that shape, and it becomes much easier to do the tip as well. So I start drawing all the petals like this, so doing the width of each one and then the tip. And then once they're all filled in and I've done all the layers, I swap my pencil for a softer HB pencil, and it's really important to get these straight, smooth lines, which means not taking the pencil off of the paper and staggering it, or like a sketch motion. You need to keep it flowing, and now it's starting to look like an actual drawing. You can see I'm doing all of the petals now, all the outside. The veins I've drawn on in 2H pencil. Each petal has a vein. Again, it's really important to keep your pencil sharp at this point. And you can see me doing the other layers of the petals as well. This is where I do those veins in the lighter pencil. the 2H pencil. And in a minute we're going to be changing the pencils back to the HB in order to define the center of the flower. Do you remember when we said that we were going to go over the green areas in order to make them stand out? So that's what we're about to do with the HB pencil, and it just gives us some definition against the yellow. So we're doing the green flowers that were right in the center, those tiny little green parts. Then we're going to do that circle of green, and then I'm going to continue with adding a little bit of definition with the HB pencil to some of those little tiny stamens that were right on the outside. You just have to be careful that you are going over the lines you've already drawn, so that you're not just leaving a big smudgy mess by doing more lines, as there's a lot of tiny details here. Those small details in that softer pencil has really made that center stand out. And if you've managed to follow along, congratulations, because that was some higher level drawing that you just did.